knows how we're doing with our customers. Not only how we're doing in general, but how we did even yesterday. The third part is to create a dynamic scorecard. Now, what's a dynamic scorecard? Most companies manage themselves by profit, by the bottom line, or by earnings per share. We say, how are you doing? We say, our earnings per share are up. But have you ever stopped to think that earnings per share and profit is a lagging indicator? What this means is it's the last thing that you can possibly create. That's why we call it the bottom line. It's not at the beginning, it's at the end. So if you want to be effective in managing your organization and creating customer delight, you have to look upstream from that bottom line and find out what are the variables, what are the leading indicators that actually influence the bottom line. Donald Peterson, when he was the chairman of Ford Motor Company, once said, I wouldn't play a very important tennis match with one eye on the scoreboard. In other words, he was saying, I have to be in the match. The score is only an indicator of how I've done. Profit is only an indicator of how you've done. Now, don't misunderstand me. Profit's important for you profit-oriented organizations. But what's important is to identify the leading indicators, and there are three. The first one, not surprisingly, is the voice of the customer. If you have your hand on the pulse of the customer and you monitor how you're doing, you will find that if your customer satisfaction takes a dip, somewhere down the road, your profitability will take a dip as well. So, first of all is the voice of the customer. That's number one leading indicator. Second leading indicator, voice of your employees. Your people have to be ready, resourced, trained, and motivated to do what's right for the customer. How do you know whether they are or not? How are you listening to their voice? The third leading indicator is the voice of quality or the voice of your processes. In other words, how robust, how effective are the processes that produce the results in the form of products and services that your customers ultimately evaluate. Three leading indicators: voice of the customer, voice of the employees, and voice of your quality or your processes. Those leading indicators will generate the profitability that you're looking for. Now let me give you an example of an organization that has hardwired the voice of the customer, and that's MBNA. MBNA is a credit card company, and by any industry standard, they're excellent. They're right up there with MasterCard and the others. Now, the example of hardwiring is very simple. They have gone to their customers and identified the 16 variables that are most important to them. And in their organization in Newark, Delaware, in the United States, in their home office building, they have a very big, what we would call, tote board, or a way of calculating how they're doing on each of those 16 variables every day. It's visible. So they list the 16 variables, and then they indicate how the rating is from their customers on that very day. And then what they do is they roll up the averages into a customer satisfaction index. And for every day that index is 96 or above, 96% or above, they then contribute money to their employees, which is held to the end of the quarter and then distributed to the employees. Now that's hardwired. First, they've gone to their customers, they've identified the 16 variables that are most important, they have created visual management by putting it on a board that every single employee goes by every day when they come and leave work, and then they measure every day how they're doing on those variables, roll it up into an average, and pay employees based on how well they've done. Hardwired. You could even say that the customers are paying the employees. Well, I'd like to end this segment with a quotation from Katrine Sporl. Katrine is the CEO of two boroughs or cities outside of London, Basingstoke and Deane. She is the chief executive. She is a public servant, and incidentally, for those of you who are not running organizations that are for-profit companies, I would say these concepts work equally as well. For those of you in the government or in nonprofit organizations, these concepts will work because you too have customers. Well, Katrine Sporl said this, it's very simple. The dialogue is only real if something happens as a consequence. So if you're going to be going out and talking to your customers and asking what they think, use that information, hardwire it, drive it back into the organization, and bring the customer alive in your company. You know, it's simply impossible to succeed in business today in the old hierarchical organization. And the reason is that we have to rely so much on other people. We have to begin to work effectively across the organization. And that is the third strategy, and that is how to improve organizational teamwork. Recently, and when we wrote the book, we observed in many companies that there are just simply too many teams. In fact, research says that in only 15% of the companies, the large organizations that are using teams aggressively, are those teams really having an impact in improving productivity. In most cases, the teams are just being a waste. We coined a phrase for that. It's like a disease that we would call teamitis. Rather, what an organization needs to have is what we call universal collaboration. Universal collaboration is when everyone's attitude and competence leads him or her to behave in a team-oriented manner, whether or not he or she is on a team at that particular moment. In our research, we had the opportunity to study effective teams and what really made them work. And part of this research took us to interview team leaders of really outstanding teams. In other words, people who, it didn't matter what team they were put in charge of, that team really did well. One of the team leaders said this, and he was talking about this idea of too many teams. He said, a team is like having a baby tiger given to you at Christmas. It does a wonderful job of keeping the mice away for about 12 months, and then it starts to eat your kids. In other words, teams have gotten out of control. Jack Welch once was quoted as saying and thinking about a small company soul in a large company body. That's really a profound quotation. And what he meant by that is that as an organization gets bigger and bigger and bigger, it becomes very important to keep that small company soul, the heart of the small company in that organization. In other words, what he really was saying was, as we get bigger, we want people to continue to think and act like entrepreneurs, like they're part of a small company. One of the keys to creating universal collaboration is to follow what we call the 7 pillars of universal collaboration. And I'm going to describe each of those now. The first pillar is to create an overarching purpose, a vision, a goal. In the last 5 or 6 years, one of the business tools that executives have been using most is the vision creating process. And in Latin America, many organizations I've discovered don't have a vision. They say that people are motivated in reverse order by money, by a really good leader. In other words, a really good leader will get more out of a person than just his or her paycheck. And they're most motivated by a cause, even more than a good leader, a cause. People will die for a cause. What is the cause of your organization? You have your pay systems, you have your leaders. What's your cause? And that is the vision. And that's why it can be beneficial, if not even important, to create this overarching purpose. It stimulates collaboration because I, as I serve the purpose of our company, will give up some of my power and collaborate with you. A good example of a vision was that was used by Walt Disney when he created the theme parks. His vision was quite simple. It was this: to create a place where we can all be kids. Let's look at the second of these pillars, and that is people involvement. People, when they're involved, get motivated. I am much more committed to executing a plan that I've helped create than simply executing your plan. So involving people is becoming more and more important. People want meaning in their work. They want to have a say. The number one reason for turnover of frontline service providers is simple. They say, nobody ever asks me what I think. And here I am, day to day, handling the problems that are coming out in the front line, and nobody even asks me what I think about how to solve them. A good example of people involvement was with Delta Airlines, one of our clients several years ago. And they wanted to understand how they could improve their service because their service had slipped. They created 1,000 what they called ambassadors, 1,000 ambassadors to their own organization. And these people were picked because they were respected performers and they were customer focused. And then these people went and each of them interviewed about 8 other employees at Delta Airlines. And they came back with a research report from their own organization that was done by people in their own organization. And that created incredible involvement. So when they decided what action plan to execute to improve service, everybody was on board. The third pillar is the internal customer process. Your internal customer is the person to whom you pass your work. It's that simply. You do work, you pass it to somebody. That's your internal customer. The problem in most organizations is we only think of the customer as being outside. And so it's the salespeople, it's the customer service people, it's the people on the telephone that get the training. When in fact, if you look at how a product or a service is created, usually it starts here inside the organization, and then it's passed to the next person, it's passed to the next person, it's passed to the next person, and out it pops, and it's given to a customer. That customer then evaluates it. The problem is that if this person hasn't done the job, even though he or she never sees an external customer, that product or service is going to have a problem and the external customer won't be happy. So the internal customer process becomes very important, and that is paying attention to the person to whom you pass your work and treating that person like a customer. The fourth pillar of universal collaboration is the development of collaboration skills. We have found that it is not a natural thing to learn how to collaborate because we are used to learning how to climb up the hierarchy and get our promotions. So in many cases, we do things that get in the way of collaboration. A wonderful story here comes from Ford of Australia. Ford of Australia a few years ago was going to be closed down by Ford in Detroit because it wasn't being productive. And the reason they weren't being productive is they were not collaborating. They did not have good teamwork. We went in and had a chance to work with them in my company, the Forum Corporation. We had a chance to work with them, and one of the things we did is we trained them to develop the 21 specific skills that are required to collaborate effectively. As a result of that, not only did Ford decide to keep the plant in Australia, they won their National Quality Award, and they were told by Ford that they had the best new product introduction of any of the plants worldwide in that particular year. The fifth pillar, positive team environments. Although we joke about having too many teams, I must say that you really cannot create extreme customer loyalty without the thoughtful deployment of teams to help them solve customer problems. For example, I'm sure that in your organizations you get complaints, and although they can seem like a nuisance, they're actually good to get. It's very important that your customers care enough about you to complain and tell you what's wrong, because they are telling you how to fix your own company. The question is, what happens to those complaints? For customer-centered organizations, they take these complaints, and not only do they solve the problem, but they look for the trends. And when they see one complaint is the most common, then they create a team to get together to find out what the root cause of that problem or complaint is and to solve it. That is an excellent use of teams. The sixth pillar of universal collaboration is organizational structure. Microsoft, for example, has decided that it really needs to be closer to its customer and create a better experience for its customers. As a result of many things they're doing, one of them is that they have reorganized around 5 customer groups. They've reorganized their entire company around 5 customer groups. And they made Steve Ballmer, who was in charge of the sales organization, president of the organization, the overall Microsoft. And the last and seventh pillar of universal collaboration is your infrastructure. Now, infrastructure really entails a lot, even how you organize your work. Now, for example, a wonderful story at Hewlett-Packard where they had a production line that went like this. It was a straight line, and people worked successfully on creating a product. And what they did is they bent it and made it into a horseshoe, like a U, so that the people at the beginning could see the work coming off at the end. And that simple reconfiguration of the production line improved quality because everybody, it wasn't like working and sending it away and never seeing it again. It was going to come back and everybody